The captain tried to board the ship like nothing was wrong, but the police dog blocked his path. And when he turned around, what he revealed left the entire dock in disbelief. The first pale fingers of dawn stretched across San Francisco Bay, painting the western edge of the harbor in delicate shades of amber and rose gold. The water's surface rippled with the gentle morning breeze, small waves lapping against the hulls of cargo vessels and fishing boats that populated the busy port. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their harsh cries punctuating the rhythmic sounds of the awakening waterfront. The distant clang of loading equipment, the low thrum of idling engines, the metallic groan of ships settling against their moorings. Detective Ethan Blackwood walked along Pier 39, his steel-toed boots making a measured cadence against the weathered planks. The familiar sense of salt water, diesel fuel, and fresh fish mingled in the crisp morning air, a perfume he had come to associate with the beginning of another day, guarding one of America's busiest ports. At 43, Ethan's once dark hair now carried generous streaks of silver at the temples, and 15 years with the harbor police had etched fine lines around his eyes. Eyes that had witnessed both the best and worst humanity could offer along these docks. Beside him padded Hector, a magnificent Belgian Malinois, with a coat the color of burnished copper in the morning light. Unlike his handler's measured steps, Hector moved with the fluid grace of a natural athlete, his powerful muscles working beneath glossy fur as his alert amber eyes continuously scanned their surroundings. His ears swiveled independently, catching sounds imperceptible to human hearing, a testament to the evolutionary perfection that made dogs like him invaluable to law enforcement. "Hell of a morning, isn't it, buddy?" Ethan murmured, his voice carrying the slight rasp of too many early mornings and too much black coffee. Hector's ears twitched at the sound of his handler's voice, but his vigilance never wavered. After 4 years together, their partnership had transcended the conventional boundaries between human and canine. They existed in a state of perpetual communication, a raised eyebrow from Ethan, a subtle shift in Hector's posture, each conveying volumes without a word being spoken. The waterfront was stirring to life around them. Stevedores secured massive shipping containers to loading cranes. Maintenance crews performed safety checks on equipment, and customs officials in their distinctive uniforms began their rounds of the newly arrived vessels. It was organized chaos, the lifeblood of international commerce flowing through a single point in a perfect cover for those whose intentions were less than legal. Hector suddenly stopped, his body tensing as he focused on something in the distance. Ethan followed his partner's gaze to see a massive cargo vessel being guided to its berth by 2 tugboats, its dark hull riding noticeably low in the water. "That's the Pacific Voyager," came a voice from behind them. Ethan turned to see Detective Sophia Reynolds approaching, 2 coffee cups in hand. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her harbor police windbreaker couldn't quite disguise the shoulder holster beneath. At 35, Sophia had spent 8 years with the department after transferring from Seattle, earning a reputation for meticulous attention to detail and an almost uncanny ability to spot inconsistencies in shipping manifests. Panamanian registry scheduled for inspection this morning. She continued, extending one of the coffee cups to Ethan. "Captain Ramirez has docked here 6 times in the past 18 months. No red flags in his record, but intelligence flagged this particular voyage for enhanced scrutiny." "Our assignment?" Ethan asked, accepting the coffee with a nod of thanks. "Commander Ellis wants a complete sweep. West Coast ports have seen a 30% increase in narcotics trafficking since January." Sophia fell into step beside them as they continued their walk toward the ship's berth. "DEA thinks the cartels are testing new routes after the crackdown in Long Beach. Getting bolder," Ethan commented, watching the vessel as it neared its assigned dock. The massive hull dwarfing the tugboats, guiding it to position, or desperate or sunny. Hector's ears twitched as if he understood the conversation, his gaze never leaving the approaching ship. Ethan smiled slightly, reaching down to scratch behind his partner's ears. The dog leaned briefly into the touch, the only acknowledgement he would offer while working. "How's Maya doing?" Sophia asked, her tone shifting to something warmer, more personal. "She's starting high school this year, right?" Ethan's expression softened at the mention of his daughter. 14 going on 30, informed me last night that her new school schedule means she needs her own car. He shook his head, a mixture of amusement and bemusement crossing his weathered features. Her mother thinks I should consider it. Ah, the joys of co-parenting with an ex, Sophia commented with a knowing half-smile. Jennifer still trying to be the fun parent. Always, Ethan took a long sip of his coffee, his gaze returning to the Pacific Voyager as it edged toward the dock. Though to be fair, she's got a point about the schedule. Maya's got swim practice at 5:30 in the morning, and neither of us can drive her consistently with our shifts. As they approached the Pacific Voyager, Ethan observed the vessel more carefully. The Panamanian flag fluttered from its stern, and crew members were visible on deck preparing for docking procedures. Hector's nostrils flared slightly, his tail held higher, a subtle change that Ethan had learned to recognize as heightened interest. Hector's picking up something, he noted quietly to Sophia. Already, she raised an eyebrow. We're not even aboard yet. Wind's coming off the water carrying scent from the ship. Ethan watched his partner's body language with practiced expertise. Nothing specific, yet just interest. The gangway creaked slightly under their boots as they boarded the vessel 30 minutes later. A tall man in a crisp white uniform approached them as they reached the deck, his measured strides projecting confidence and authority. Captain Xavier Ramirez had the weathered complexion of someone who had spent decades at sea, deep lines etched around his dark eyes, his salt and pepper beard meticulously trimmed against his jawline. Welcome aboard the Pacific Voyager, detectives. His English carried a slight Spanish accent, his handshake firm and professional as he greeted each of them in turn. I am Captain Ramirez. We were expecting you, though perhaps not quite so early. A Harbor Police K-9 unit, Captain? Ethan replied, noting how the captain's eyes flicked briefly to Hector before returning to his face. Detective Blackwood, and this is Detective Reynolds. The four-legged officer is Hector. Cantidos one my heart. Ah, a beautiful animal, Ramirez commented with an appreciative nod toward the dog. Belgian Malinois. Yes, my cousin raises German Shepherds in Veracruz. Very similar, but I understand the Malinois has more, how do you say it, intensity. That's one way of putting it. Ethan agreed, observing the captain's seemingly relaxed demeanor while noting the slight tension around his eyes. We're conducting a standard inspection today, Captain. We'll need access to all areas of the vessel, including crew quarters, cargo holds, and the bridge shown in any sao. Of course, Ramirez nodded, gesturing broadly. Though I hope we can expedite this process, we're already behind schedule due to weather delays coming through the Panama Canal, and our berthing time is limited. We need to be underway again by tomorrow morning to maintain our delivery schedule. Ethan noted the captain's apparent concern, a slight tapping of his fingers against his thigh, occasional glances at his watch. Some nervousness around law enforcement was common, but something about Ramirez's manner struck Ethan as calculated rather than genuinely rushed. We'll be as efficient as possible, Captain, Ethan replied, evenly watching as Hector calmly surveyed their surroundings, his nose working continuously. But we do need to be thorough. Captain Ramirez led them to his office, a compact but immaculately organized space with nautical charts secured to the walls and a small desk dominated by a computer terminal and neatly stacked paperwork. The room smelled of leather-bound log books, high-grade printer paper, and the faintest trace of expensive cologne. Our complete cargo manifest, crew list, and previous port clearances, Ramirez explained, handing several documents to Sophia. Everything is in order, as you'll see. We carry mostly manufacturing components, electronics, textiles, some agricultural products, coffee primarily. Nothing unusual. As the captain spoke, Hector circled the small office, sniffing methodically along the edges of the room, his movements deliberate and focused. Ramirez's eyes followed the dog's movements, a bead of sweat forming at his temple, despite the cool air-conditioned space. How many crew members are you carrying this voyage? Captain Sophia asked, scanning the personnel manifest with practiced efficiency. 22 in total, 16 regular crew. 4 engineering specialists, myself and First Officer Vargas. Ramirez gestured to a detailed crew schedule posted on the wall. Most are resting now after the night watch. We maintain a standard rotation 8 hours on 16 off. And how many are first-time crew with you? Ethan inquired, watching Hector's continued interest in a particular corner of the office. The question seemed to catch Ramirez slightly off guard. First time, perhaps 4 or 5. We had some turnover in Cartagena, normal rotation, you understand. Seamen follow the work. Hector had paused near the captain's safe, a rectangular steel box bolted to the wall behind the desk. The dog's posture had shifted subtly, not yet the rigid stance of a full alert, but is showing definite interest. Ethan made a mental note without drawing attention to his partner's behavior. We'd like to begin with the crew quarters, then move to the cargo holds. Ethan said, standard procedure. Of course. Ramirez nodded, pressing an intercom button on his desk. Vargas, please come to my office and escort our visitors to the crew section. While they waited for the first officer, Ethan's mind drifted to the first time he had worked with Hector 4 years ago. Unlike many canine officers who received their partners as young pre-trained dogs, Ethan had been assigned Hector under unusual circumstances. The Malinois had been recovered during a raid on a dog-fighting operation in Oakland. Unlike the pit bulls typically associated with such operations, Hector had apparently been kept as a testing dog used to gauge the fighting spirit of other animals without being put in the ring himself. The veterinarian who examined him had been amazed at his physical condition, despite the abusive environment, noting his exceptional intelligence and drive. When the K9 training division evaluated him, Hector had displayed an extraordinary aptitude for detection work, picking up in weeks. What took most dogs months to master, his troubled past had left him wary of most humans, but he had formed an immediate connection with Ethan, perhaps recognizing in the detective a similar quality of cautious reserve. Their first weeks together had been challenging. Hector followed commands perfectly, but maintained an emotional distance that confused the training officers. The breakthrough came during their 3rd week of narcotics detection training, when Hector had suddenly abandoned the practice scenarios to alert on a maintenance worker's toolbox, revealing a substantial quantity of methamphetamine that the worker had been smuggling into the facility. From that moment, their partnership had deepened daily. Ethan came to understand that Hector's apparent aloofness wasn't emotional unavailability, but careful assessment. He gave his trust only when earned, but once given, it was absolute. The arrival of First Officer Vargas interrupted Ethan's reminiscence. The man who entered was tall and lean, with the efficient movements of someone accustomed to navigating tight spaces. His uniform was as immaculate as the captain's, though his demeanor seemed more genuinely relaxed. First Officer Eduardo Vargas. He introduced himself with a slight bow. I'll show you through the vessel. The crew quarters were standard maritime accommodations, compact bunks stacked in twos with narrow lockers for personal effects. The spaces were clean and orderly, testament to the discipline enforced on commercial vessels. As they moved through the narrow corridors, Ethan noted how Hector's attention sharpened when they reached a section marked Engineering Crew. These are the quarters for our engine room specialists. Vargas explained, opening a door to reveal a 4-bunk chamber, currently unoccupied as they're on shift below. Hector entered the cabin and moved directly to the locker at the far end, his posture becoming more focused. He circled back to the same locker, twice his tail position, changing slightly, not yet the rigid posture of a full alert, but definitely showing interest. Hey, whose bunk is this? Ethan asked, gesturing to the bottom berth nearest the locker. Vargas consulted a small chart by the door. That would be Ernesto Diaz, one of our newer engine room technicians, joined us in Cartagena 3 months ago. Ethan nodded, opening the locker that had captured Hector's attention. Inside were standard sailor's possessions, several sets of work clothes, a weathered paperback novel in Spanish toiletries, and a small frame photograph of a young woman with 2 small children. Nothing immediately suspicious, but Hector's continued interest was telling. As they continued their inspection, Ethan became aware of Captain Ramirez shadowing their movements, appearing at intersections and doorways with too much regularity to be coincidental. The captain maintained a pleasant demeanor, offering explanations about the ship's operations and answering Sophia's questions about cargo and routing, but his presence felt increasingly intrusive. "Your captain seems very hands-on," Sophia commented quietly as they descended a ladder to the lower deck. "First time I've seen a captain personally monitor a routine inspection," Ethan agreed, keeping his voice low. "Usually they're only too happy to delegate." The inspection continued to the galley and common areas where several off-duty crew members were eating or relaxing. Hector's behavior changed dramatically as he focused on two men seated at a corner table playing cards, one heavy-set with a shaved head, the other younger with an elaborate tattoo visible above his collar. Diaz and Mendoza. Vargas identified them when Ethan inquired, "Engine room crew." The heavy-set Diaz shifted nervously in his seat as they approached, while Mendoza kept his expression neutral, though his eyes darted repeatedly between the dog and the exit. "Gentlemen," Ethan nodded to them, "we're conducting a routine inspection. I may have some questions for you shortly." Diaz muttered something in Spanish too low for Ethan to catch, but Sophia's slight frown suggested she had understood and found it concerning. "He said they know," she whispered as they continued through the galley, like he was warning the other man. At the far end of the corridor, they approached the captain's private quarters. As they neared the door, Ramirez suddenly materialized from an adjacent passageway, stepping directly in front of them with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Detectives, I must insist on privacy for my personal quarters," he said, his tone hardening slightly despite the maintained smile. "Maritime protocol recognizes the captain's cabin as a personal domain. I'm sure you understand." Ethan maintained a professional demeanor despite the captain's transparent attempt to block their path. "With all due respect, Captain, our inspection authority under Port Security Code 27-4 includes all spaces on vessels docked in San Francisco Bay, including captain's quarters, standard procedure, especially on first entry after international waters." Before Ramirez could object further, Hector moved purposefully around him to the door, then sat directly in front of it, his posture rigid and alert, the trained indication that he had detected contraband. "Hector is alerting, Captain," Ethan said, his voice firm but neutral. "I need to inspect your quarters immediately." Ramirez's face paled slightly beneath his weathered tan, but he maintained his composure. "This is ridiculous. Your dog is mistaken. Perhaps he smells the Cuban cigars I occasionally enjoy. They're perfectly legal for personal consumption." "Hector doesn't alert on tobacco products," Ethan replied, his hand moving instinctively closer to his service weapon. "His training is specific to narcotics and certain explosives. Please step aside, sir." Sophia had already positioned herself slightly to the side, her own hand near her weapon, creating a tactical advantage should the situation escalate. The tension in the narrow corridor was palpable as seconds stretched into a full minute of silence. After what seemed an eternity, Ramirez relented, producing a key from his pocket. "Very well, but I must protest this invasion of privacy." As the door swung open, Hector entered, immediately moving with purpose toward a small safe mounted on the wall beside an elegantly appointed desk of polished teak. He sat directly in front of it, his alert posture unmistakable. "I need you to open that safe, Captain," Ethan said, his suspicions now fully aroused. "That contains ship's valuables and confidential documents." Ramirez objected. "I cannot." "Whitaker, Captain Ramirez," Ethan interrupted firmly. "I can get a warrant in 30 minutes, during which time this vessel will remain sealed with no one permitted to enter or leave. Or you can open it now and we can resolve the situation quickly." As Ramirez reluctantly moved toward the safe, Ethan's mind flashed back to the first major bust he and Hector had made together 2 years into their partnership. They had been searching a fishing vessel suspected of minor violations when Hector had alerted on a seemingly solid bulkhead. The subsequent investigation revealed a hidden compartment containing over 200 kilograms of cocaine, establishing their reputation within the department and cementing the trust between handler and dog. Now, watching Ramirez's carefully controlled movements as he entered the combination, Ethan felt the familiar, heightened awareness that came with moments of potential danger. His senses seemed to sharpen the faint smell of the captain's cologne now tinged with sweat, the subtle creaking of the ship's hull against the dock, the controlled rhythm of Hector's breathing as he maintained his alert posture. The safe door swung open with a soft, metallic click. Inside were several items, a leather-bound logbook that didn't match the official ship's log they had seen earlier, a small leather pouch, an external hard drive, several passports, and a stack of what appeared to be private correspondence. "Step back, please," Ethan instructed Ramirez, who complied with visible tension in his shoulders. The leather pouch yielded the first concrete evidence, a small plastic bag containing white powder, and another with several pale blue tablets. Field testing would be necessary to confirm, but Ethan had little doubt about what they were. "Captain Ramirez, can you explain this?" Ethan asked, his voice professionally neutral, despite the significant discovery. "Those aren't mine." Ramirez replied automatically, the denial so quick and practiced that it only heightened Ethan's suspicions. Someone must have placed them there. Perhaps one of the crew members with access to my quarters. The unofficial logbook proved more immediately revealing. Instead of operational entries, it contained columns of numbers, dates, and coded notations that clearly documented something the captain didn't want officially recorded. As Ethan flipped through the pages, he noted repeated references to specific cargo container numbers and what appeared to be payment amounts. "Harbor Police Command, this is Detective Blackwood," Ethan said into his radio. "We have a positive alert situation aboard the Pacific Voyager. Requesting additional units for support and evidence processing." The response was immediate. "Copy that detective units are being dispatched ETA 8 minutes. I couldn't assure them." As Sophia secured the items from the safe, Ethan continued to study the captain's quarters. Experience had taught him that once a concealment was discovered, others were likely nearby. Hector seemed to agree, continuing to investigate the cabin with focused intensity. The dog paused near a section of wood paneling that appeared identical to the rest of the cabin's elegant appointments. He scratched lightly at the base of the panel, then looked back at Ethan, a modification of his standard alert that they had developed for situations where the contraband might be behind a barrier. Ethan knelt beside the panel, running his fingers along its edges until he felt a slight irregularity. Applying pressure to that spot caused the panel to pop forward slightly, revealing a hidden compartment built into the bulkhead. Inside were several more items: a satellite phone, different from the standard maritime communications equipment, a stack of cash in both euros and dollars, and most significantly, a small notebook containing what appeared to be contact information and meeting locations. "Captain Ramirez, you're being detained pending further investigation," Sophia announced, producing zip-tie restraints. "Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." For a moment, it seemed Ramirez might resist. His eyes darted around the cabin as if seeking escape, though there was none to be found in the confined space. Then, with a slight slump of his shoulders, he complied, allowing Sophia to secure his hands. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly as the restraints tightened around his wrists. "You have no idea what you're involving yourselves in." "Enlighten us," Ethan suggested, maintaining a careful position between the captain and the door. Ramirez shook his head slightly. "It would be better for everyone if you simply took the drugs you found in the safe and let this go. Write your report, claim your victory, but leave the rest alone." There was something in his tone, not the typical bluster of a criminal caught in the act, but something that sounded almost like concern. Before Ethan could pursue this unusual statement, the radio crackled with the announcement that additional officers had arrived and were boarding the vessel. As Sophia escorted Ramirez to the main deck where he could be transferred to the arriving officers, Ethan remained in the cabin with Hector continuing their thorough search. The dog's behavior suggested there was more to be found, though he was no longer giving specific alerts. Ethan examined the desk carefully, running his fingers along its underside where his eye couldn't easily see. His persistence was rewarded when he discovered a hidden drawer built into the ornate molding, completely invisible unless you knew exactly where to press. The mechanism released with a soft click, revealing a slim compartment containing a USB drive and what appeared to be encryption keys written on a small card. What were you hiding, Captain?" Ethan murmured to himself, carefully bagging the new evidence. By the time he rejoined the others on the main deck, the situation had evolved significantly. 6 additional harbor police officers had established control of the vessel, and a mobile command unit had been set up on the dock below. Captain Ramirez sat on a bench near the gangway. Still in restraints, his expression now completely closed off. "We have secured the 2 crew members from the galley," Sophia reported, joining Ethan near the railing. Diaz initially tried to claim he didn't speak English, but that fell apart pretty quickly. When I started questioning him in Spanish, Mendoza hasn't said a word, but he's carrying 3 different identification cards with different names. The rabbit hole gets deeper. Ethan commented, briefing her on what he'd found in the hidden drawer. "Tech team will need to examine that USB drive in a secure environment. No telling what's on it." Commander Ellis had arrived by this point, her tall figure unmistakable as she conferred with the evidence technicians on the dock. At 52, Diana Ellis had spent half her life in law enforcement, rising through the ranks with a reputation for incorruptibility and strategic thinking. Her silver blonde hair was cut in a practical bob, and she moved with the confident efficiency that had earned her both respect and a certain wariness among her subordinates. "Blackwood," she called, catching sight of him at the railing. "I need a preliminary assessment before we commit more resources." "What are we dealing with here?" Ethan made his way down the gangway, Hector following attentively at his side. He gave a concise summary of their findings, emphasizing the coded logbook and the captain's unusual reaction. "He wasn't surprised we found the drugs," Ethan concluded, "but he seemed genuinely concerned when we discovered the hidden compartment and the notebook, almost like he was warning us off for our own good." Ellis's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Cartel operations have been getting increasingly sophisticated. We've been hearing chatter about new smuggling techniques and expanded routes." She glanced toward the massive cargo holds of the Pacific Voyager. "How confident are you that there's more contraband on this vessel?" "Given what we've found so far and Hector's continuing interest, I'd say it's highly probable," Ethan replied, "but we'll need more time and resources for a complete search. This ship has hundreds of potential hiding places." "You've got them," Ellis decided. "I'm declaring this a priority investigation, full team deployment, and I'll have the harbor master extend their berthing authorization indefinitely." She paused, studying Ethan's face. "You look troubled, Detective." Ethan hesitated, trying to articulate the nebulous concern that had been growing since their interaction with Ramirez. "Something doesn't fit the standard pattern. The captain's warning, the elaborate documentation. Most trafficking operations keep records to a minimum. This feels more complex." "A complex how?" "I'm not sure yet," Ethan admitted. "But I get the feeling we've stumbled onto something bigger than a routine drug shipment." Ellis considered this for a moment. "Follow your instincts, but proceed with caution. If this is as significant as you suspect, there may be powerful interests involved." She lowered her voice slightly. "The Port Authority has been under political pressure to keep commerce flowing smoothly. Any delays to shipping schedules get noticed at very high levels." "Understood," Ethan nodded, recognizing the subtext of her warning. Cases that attracted political attention often became complicated in ways that had nothing to do with the actual investigation. As Ellis moved away to coordinate the expanding operation, Sophia joined Ethan at the base of the gangway. "They're bringing in the mobile X-ray unit for the containers," she informed him. "Should be here within the hour. What's our next move?" Likewise. Ethan looked up at the imposing bulk of the cargo vessel, considering their options. "Let's check the engineering section." Hector showed interest in Diaz's quarters, and both he and Mendoza are engine room crew. There might be a connection. The engineering section of a cargo vessel was a world unto itself, a massive space dominated by the ship's powerful engines, filled with the smell of machine oil, hot metal, and the underlying tang of diesel fuel. The constant thrum of auxiliary power units created a background vibration that could be felt through the deck plates, and the temperature was noticeably higher than in the rest of the ship. Chief Engineer Ortega met them at the entrance to his domain, a stocky man with capable hands and the permanently ingrained oil stains that mark career engineers. Unlike the captain and first officer, his manner seemed genuinely open, his annoyance at the interruption professional rather than suspicious. "We're maintaining essential systems only while docked," he explained as he led them through the labyrinthine space. "Full shutdown is not possible without shore power connections, which weren't scheduled until tomorrow morning." Hector moved through the engineering spaces with the same methodical attention he had shown elsewhere, but his interest visibly heightened when they reached a section devoted to the ship's water purification system. A complex arrangement of tanks, filters, and control panels that converted seawater to potable water for the crew. "This is our desalination plant." Ortega explained, "Capacity of 5,000 gallons per day, though we rarely run at full capacity except during long Pacific crossings." Hector circled one of the large filtration tanks, then sat abruptly, his alert pose unmistakable. "Your dog is mistaken," Ortega frowned. "These systems are sealed and monitored constantly. No one could tamper with them without alarms being triggered or Ethan had learned long ago that when people confidently declared Hector was wrong, they were almost invariably revealing their own blind spots. "Let's have a closer look anyway," he suggested mildly, standard procedure. With evident reluctance, Ortega opened an access panel on the filtration system. The interior was a complex arrangement of pipes, filters, and monitoring sensors, all appearing normal to the untrained eye. Hector, however, remained focused on one specific section of the assembly. "Can this particular component be removed for maintenance?" Ethan asked, indicating the section that had captured Hector's attention. "The carbon filter housing, yes. It's designed to be replaced every 6 months." Ortega acknowledged, "But it was just serviced in Panama 3 weeks ago. There should be no need." "I'd like to examine it anyway," Ethan interrupted firmly. The process of removing the cylindrical housing took nearly 20 minutes, with Ortega muttering about unnecessary system disruption throughout. When the component was finally extracted and placed on a workbench, its weight seemed to surprise even the chief engineer. "This is too heavy." He frowned, genuine confusion crossing his features. "The carbon medium isn't light, but this is at least 15 kilos more than it should be." Upon disassembly, the reason became immediately apparent. The interior of the filter housing had been modified to create a concealed compartment while maintaining its functional appearance. Within this space, sealed in waterproof packaging, were dozens of packages of white powder. "I had no knowledge of this." Ortega insisted, his face paling as he stared at the evidence. "The system was serviced by external contractors in Panama under Port Authority supervision." "We'll need the names of those contractors," Sophia said, already documenting the discovery with her department-issued camera. "And any other components they may have worked on." Ethan's radio crackled with an update from the deck team. "Blackwood Mobile X-ray Unit is online. Initial scans of Container Section 3 are showing anomalies in containers, PC-421 and PC-438. Both match numbers from the captain's ledger." "Copy that," Ethan responded. "We've got another positive find in engineering. Appears to be a sophisticated concealment within the water purification system. Have technical services send a team to document and recover." As they prepared to return to the main deck, Ethan noticed Hector's continued interest in the engineering spaces. "We're not done here," he said to Sophia. "Hector thinks there's more. Aham." Over the next 2 hours, their search revealed an elaborate smuggling operation that went far beyond the initial discoveries. 3 more filtration components yielded similar concealed packages. A locked storage cabinet in the auxiliary control room contained documentation linking the engineering modifications to a shell company in Panama. Most significantly, Hector alerted on what appeared to be a solid bulkhead near the engine room access ladder. Careful examination revealed an expertly crafted false panel, behind which was a narrow space containing communications equipment not listed in the ship's inventory, including a satellite uplink device capable of transmitting data without going through the vessel's main communication systems. "This is military grade," Sophia observed, examining the equipment without touching it, "designed to be untraceable and secure." "This isn't standard cartel equipment," Ethan nodded, his earlier sense of unease growing stronger. This whole operation feels different. Too sophisticated, too compartmentalized. He gestured around the engineering section. The captain had his own separate cash-in records. This setup appears to be running parallel but distinct from that. Almost like there are multiple operations happening on the same vessel. By mid-afternoon, the full scope of the situation had begun to emerge. The X-ray scans of the cargo containers had revealed sophisticated concealments within legitimate cargo industrial equipment that had been modified to create hidden compartments, just as Captain Ramirez's log had documented. Evidence teams had recovered over 120 kilograms of what field tests indicated was high-purity cocaine, along with smaller quantities of synthetic opioids. Yet something still troubled Ethan as he reviewed the findings with Commander Ellis in the mobile command unit that had been established on the dock. Hector lay at his feet, exhausted from hours of intense work, but still occasionally lifting his head when certain crew members were escorted past the window. The operation is impressively compartmentalized, Ethan explained, indicating the evidence photographs spread across the table. The captain's stash, the engineering concealments, and the cargo containers all appear to be separate systems with different people responsible for each. Standard cartel practice. Ellis noted cells that don't know each other's operations, limits exposure if one part is compromised. That's just it. Ethan frowned. This feels too elaborate even for that. And there's something else. He pulled out his phone, showing Ellis a series of images he had captured from the captain's quarters. These documents reference delivery points and contacts, but they don't match any known cartel territories or operations we've seen before. Ellis studied the images, her expression growing increasingly troubled. Some of these locations are military installations, others are research facilities. She looked up sharply. This isn't just about drugs, is it? I don't think so, Ethan confirmed. The narcotics might be just one component, either a cover for something else or a parallel operation, taking advantage of the same smuggling infrastructure. Intelligence gathering. Ellis surmised, her voice dropping to ensure they wouldn't be overheard by the technicians working nearby. Possibly industrial or military espionage using the shipping routes as cover, which would explain the captain's warning. Ethan nodded. He knew being caught with drugs was one thing, but being implicated in espionage is an entirely different level of trouble. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. Through the command unit's window, Ethan could see two officers restraining one of the crew members. The young tattooed man they had identified earlier as Mendoza. The man was struggling violently, shouting in Spanish as they attempted to secure him. "What's happening?" Ellis demanded as they stepped outside. He was trying to access the ship's communication system. The senior officer explained, maintaining his grip on the struggling man. When confronted, he became combative and attempted to flee. Sophia had appeared from the direction of the ship, slightly breathless. "He was trying to send a coded message," she reported, something about packages compromised and Protocol 7. "Get him to a secure interrogation room immediately." Ellis ordered, "I want a full intelligence team debriefing him within the hour." As the officers led the still struggling Mendoza toward a waiting transport vehicle, Ethan noticed Hector's attention had shifted to the far end of the dock. The dog was standing alert, his gaze fixed on a figure moving between shipping containers some distance away. "Someone's trying to leave the secure area," Ethan said quietly to Ellis. "Northwest corner, moving behind the blue containers." Ellis immediately radioed the perimeter teams. "Possible unauthorized individual attempting to exit through northwest section. All units respond." The figure, now recognizable as one of the ship's crew, broke into a run upon seeing the officers responding to the call. Without hesitation, Ethan released Hector's leash with a clear command. "Pursue and hold, Ixoi." Hector launched forward with explosive speed, covering ground far faster than any human could manage. The fleeing crewman glanced back, his eyes widening at the sight of 75 pounds of focused Belgian Malinois, rapidly closing the distance between them. Rather than continuing toward the perimeter, the man veered toward the edge of the dock, clearly intending to jump into the water. Hector, anticipating the move, cut sharply to intercept him before he could reach the edge. The crewman drew something from his waistband, a flash of metal that Ethan immediately recognized as a weapon. "Gun!" he shouted in warning to the approaching officers. Before the man could bring the weapon to bear, Hector executed his training perfectly, launching into a controlled takedown that caught the crewman at the knees. Both dog and man went down in a tangle of limbs, the gun skittering across the concrete dock surface. Ethan reached them seconds later, securing the weapon while Hector maintained a hold on the crewman's arm, applying enough pressure to prevent escape without causing serious injury. The man was gasping for breath, his eyes wild with a mixture of fear and fury. "It's over," Ethan told him, securing his wrists with restraints as additional officers arrived to assist. "You're not going anywhere." Only once the man was fully secured did Ethan give the command for Hector to release his hold. The dog immediately obeyed, moving to a position beside his handler. His breathing elevated from the exertion, but his posture still alert and professional. A search of the captured crewman revealed a Panamanian passport, identifying him as Luis Ortiz, the ship's communications officer, a position that would have given him access to all the vessel's messaging systems and considerable insight into its operations. More significantly, he carried a second phone hidden in a specially designed pocket of his uniform shirt with recent encrypted messages that the technical team would later determine contained coded status reports to an unknown recipient. As Ortiz was led away, Commander Ellis approached Ethan and Hector, her expression a mixture of approval and concern. "Excellent work by both of you," she acknowledged. "But this is escalating beyond a standard interdiction. That's 3 crew members now actively attempting to either destroy evidence or alert outside contacts." Ethan nodded, scratching Hector behind the ears in quiet acknowledgement of his performance. "They're panicking, which means whatever they're involved in carries serious consequences for failure." Ellis's phone buzzed with an incoming message. After reading it, her expression turned grave. "Preliminary analysis of the captain's electronic records shows connections to at least 2 known foreign intelligence operations. DEA and Homeland Security are taking over the investigation effective immediately." The remainder of the afternoon passed in a blur of interagency coordination, and evidence processing federal agents in unmarked vehicles arrived to transport the detained crew members and seize the recovered contraband. Technical specialists began a comprehensive sweep of the vessel's electronic systems, and divers were deployed to examine the ship's hull for external modifications or attached devices. By sunset, the initial phase of the operation was complete. The Pacific Voyager remained secured at the dock, now under round-the-clock guard, with access restricted to authorized personnel. Only Ethan and Sophia had spent hours debriefing federal officials, providing detailed accounts of their discoveries and observations. As they finally prepared to leave the scene, Ethan took a moment to stand at the edge of the dock, gazing at the massive vessel silhouetted against the deepening twilight. Hector sat beside him, seemingly contemplative, as he too watched the ship that had yielded so many secrets. "You're thinking about what we didn't find," Sophia observed, joining them at the railing. Ethan nodded. Hector was still showing interest in sections of the ship we never got to properly search. "There's more there, but it's out of our hands now." "Free federal jurisdiction?" Sophia sighed. "Now we get to write reports while they take all the credit." "That's not what bothers me," Ethan admitted. "It's the feeling that we only scratched the surface. The drugs, the espionage equipment, those might just be decoys for something even more significant. Or maybe we actually disrupted something major today." Sophia suggested, "You and Hector made the initial finds that broke this whole thing open. That counts for something." Ethan smiled slightly, reaching down to rest his hand on Hector's head. "He made the finds, I just followed his lead." "Speaking of following," Sophia said, her tone shifting to something lighter. "Maya's swim meet is tomorrow, right? Are you going?" "Oh, wouldn't miss it," Ethan replied. "She's swimming the 200-meter freestyle, been training all summer for it." "Good," Sophia nodded approvingly. "You need to be there for those moments. This job takes enough from us without sacrificing family time too." As they walked toward the parking area, Ethan found himself reflecting on the complex web of connections that defined his life. His partnership with Hector, his relationship with his daughter, his colleagues at the department, and the intricate dance of international shipping that brought vessels like the Pacific Voyager to their shores, each carrying its own combination of legitimate commerce and hidden agendas. In the fading light, San Francisco Bay stretched before them, its waters reflecting the first stars of evening. Somewhere out there, Ethan knew other ships were approaching with their own secrets. And tomorrow, after cheering for his daughter at her swim meet, he and Hector would return to these docks ready to uncover whatever those vessels might be concealing. "Come on, buddy," he said to Hector as they reached his department SUV. "Let's go home." The dog jumped effortlessly into the specially designed compartment in the rear of the vehicle, settling onto his cushioned platform with a soft sigh that seemed to express contentment at a job well done. As Ethan started the engine, his phone pinged with a message. It was from Commander Ellis. "Preliminary analysis of Seas communications suggests larger network, full briefing tomorrow, 0800. Well done today." He showed the message to Sophia, who had paused beside her own vehicle. "Looks like our instincts were right. This was just the beginning." "It always is," she replied with a tired smile. "See you tomorrow, Blackwood. Get some rest." As he drove away from the port, Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror at Hector, now dozing peacefully despite the day's intensity. The bond between them had been forged through countless operations like today's, each building upon their mutual trust and understanding. Whatever tomorrow's briefing revealed, whatever larger conspiracy they had stumbled upon, Ethan knew one thing with absolute certainty: as long as Hector was by his side, they would face it together. The city lights glittered across the bay, a constellation of human activity mirroring the stars above. Somewhere within that complex tapestry of light and shadow, the next challenge awaited them. But for tonight, at least, they had earned their rest. "Good work today, partner," Ethan said softly. "Really good work." Hector's ear twitched in acknowledgement, the smallest gesture from a remarkable animal who had once again proven that sometimes the most extraordinary insights came from those who observed the world not through human eyes but through senses we were only beginning to understand. The following morning dawned with a crystalline clarity that belied the complexity waiting at Harbor Police Headquarters. Ethan arrived at 7:45, a large coffee in one hand and Hector's lead in the other. Both of them refreshed after a night's rest that had seemed all too brief. The building hummed with unusual activity for such an early hour, a testament to the significance of yesterday's discoveries. In the third-floor conference room, Ethan found an assembly that confirmed his suspicions about the case's elevated status. Alongside Commander Ellis and the Harbor Police senior staff sat representatives from the DEA Homeland Security and a woman whose deliberately nondescript attire and watchful demeanor practically screamed intelligence services, though she wore no agency identification. Detective Blackwood. Ellis greeted him with a nod toward an empty chair. "We were just about to begin." Sophia arrived moments later, sliding into the seat beside Ethan. With a questioning glance at the unfamiliar faces, he gave an almost imperceptible shrug in response. Their usual silent communication, requiring no words. Hector settled at Ethan's feet, appearing to doze but maintaining the particular alertness that Ethan recognized as his partner's working mode, relaxed but ready. Commander Ellis began without preamble. "Yesterday's interdiction aboard the Pacific Voyager has opened a significant intelligence opportunity. What initially appeared to be standard narcotics trafficking has revealed connections to a sophisticated multinational operation." She nodded to the unidentified woman. "This is Agent Constance Rivera. She'll be coordinating the interagency response, and Rivera stood her movements economical and precise. "What I'm about to share is classified at Level 3 security clearance. It doesn't leave this room." Her voice carried the slight, unplaceable accent of someone who had lived in many places but belonged fully to none of them. For the past 18 months, federal intelligence has been tracking an operation codenamed Poseidon's Gate, a network using commercial shipping as cover for multiple illicit activities. She activated the room's display screen, showing a map with shipping routes highlighted across the Pacific. The network operates through a series of shell companies based primarily in Panama, Singapore, and Cyprus. They've infiltrated legitimate shipping operations, placing their people in key positions, communications officers, engineers, sometimes captains. Like on the Pacific Voyager, Sophia observed. Exactly, Rivera nodded. Captain Ramirez was recruited 3 years ago. His financial records show regular payments through offshore accounts linked to known front organizations. What makes this network particularly concerning is their client base. The screen changed to show a series of photographs. They provide services to at least 3 hostile government intelligence agencies, 4 major drug cartels, and several terrorist organizations, all competitors who would normally never work together. A criminal shipping infrastructure for hire, Ethan surmised, available to whoever can pay. Precisely, Rivera confirmed. They've created a sophisticated smuggling architecture that can be utilized by multiple clients simultaneously, often on the same vessel. The drugs provide operational funding, while the intelligence gathering and technology transfers generate their primary revenue. Ellis picked up the thread. The narcotics found yesterday were being moved for the Sinaloa cartel, but the communications equipment in engineering was linked to foreign intelligence gathering. What you uncovered, detectives, was essentially a ship serving multiple masters, each compartmentalized and separate. Which explains the different security protocols we observed. Ethan noted, connecting the dots, different crew members responsible for different aspects of the operation, many probably unaware of what their colleagues were handling. Summary, what we didn't anticipate, Rivera continued, was that your interdiction would trigger such an immediate response from the network. The coded messages that crewman Mendoza attempted to send contained a particular protocol designation that our analysts have been trying to decipher for months. She nodded appreciatively toward Ethan and Sophia. Your timing was inadvertently perfect. We now have solid intelligence on their emergency procedures. So where do we go from here? Ethan asked, sensing there was more to the briefing than just information sharing. Rivera exchanged glances with Commander Ellis before continuing. The Pacific Voyager was scheduled to make 3 more stops along the West Coast before returning to Panama, Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver. Based on the intelligence we've gathered, we believe significant technology transfers were planned for Seattle, possibly including prototype semiconductor components that would violate numerous export restrictions. You want to let the ship continue its journey? Sophia realized her tone, indicating she wasn't entirely comfortable with the idea. A controlled delivery, Rivera confirmed. With modifications, we would replace the original crew with undercover operatives, while maintaining the appearance that the ship was released after a routine inspection found nothing significant. The network would assume their concealment methods worked. Ethan nodded, seeing the logic, and lead us to their contacts up the coast. Exactly, Ellis said. But this operation would require seamless coordination, including local assets familiar with port operations in each city. She looked directly at Ethan and Sophia. Which is why we're inviting Harbor Police participation. Your expertise with port security protocols would be invaluable. Ethan felt a sinking sensation in his stomach that had nothing to do with the case itself. When would this operation begin? The ship would depart tomorrow morning. Rivera replied, We've already begun inserting our people as a replacement crew. The surveillance equipment is being installed tonight. Tomorrow morning, Maya's swim meet, the regional qualifying event she'd been training for all summer. He had promised her repeatedly that nothing would keep him from being there. A promise made with particular emphasis after missing her school play last spring due to an operation that ran long. I understand this is short notice, Ellis added clearly, reading his hesitation. Your participation would be voluntary, of course. I'm in, Sophia said without hesitation, her expression suggesting she had no conflicting obligations. All eyes turned to Ethan. The logical part of his brain understood the importance of the operation, recognized the rare opportunity to significantly disrupt a sophisticated criminal network. But another part, the part that had seen disappointment in his daughter's eyes too many times, rebelled at the thought of breaking another promise. "I have a personal commitment tomorrow morning that I can't break," he said finally, "a family obligation that's been planned for months." He felt rather than saw the subtle shift in the room, the slight cooling of professional regard that always seemed to accompany prioritizing personal life over operational needs. Rivera's expression remained neutral. "We understand detective family commitments are important." The words were correct, but the tone carried the unspoken message that in her world, the mission always came first. "Perhaps you could join the operation in progress?" Ellis suggested, offering a compromise. "After your commitment is complete." Ethan nodded, grateful for the middle ground. "I could be ready to deploy by early afternoon. Hector and I could meet the vessel in Portland or proceed directly to Seattle if that's more beneficial to the operation." Rivera considered this for a moment before nodding. "That could work. We'll have Agent Phillips coordinate with you regarding rendezvous details." She gestured to one of her colleagues, a square-jawed man who had been silent throughout the briefing. The meeting continued with operational details, contingency planning, and intelligence summaries on known network associates who might be encountered during the mission. Throughout the discussion, Ethan found his thoughts periodically drifting to Maya. How at 14 she was already developing the determined independence that characterized her mother, yet still looked to him for the validation and support he too often struggled to provide consistently. When the meeting finally concluded, Sophia lingered as the others filed out, waiting until they were alone before speaking. "Ari, Maya's swim meet," she said, not a question but a statement of understanding. "Regional qualifiers," Ethan confirmed, absently scratching Hector behind the ears. "She dropped 3 seconds off her time in the preliminaries. Coach thinks she has a real shot at making the state competition." "You're doing the right thing," Sophia told him, her voice gentle but firm. "The operation will still be there tomorrow afternoon." "I know," Ethan sighed, "but you know how this works. The first 24 hours are critical. Missing the initial deployment means missing key intelligence, established protocols, Raikunani. It means being a father." Sophia interrupted, "Which is a job just as important as being a detective." She paused, her expression softening slightly. "And frankly, it's one you're still learning, just like the rest of us are learning our roles here." "Voice of experience?" Ethan asked with a half smile, knowing Sophia had her own complicated family history. A marriage that had ended when her husband couldn't adapt to the demands of her career, and a son now in college who had spent his teenage years navigating the complexities of divided loyalties. "Voice of someone who's made her own mistakes," she acknowledged. "Trust me, Ethan. 20 years from now, you won't remember the details of this operation, but Maya will remember whether her father was there for her big moment." The Olympic-sized pool at Westridge Academy gleamed under bright, fluorescent lights, the water's surface occasionally disturbed by the practice laps of teenage swimmers preparing for their events. The air carried the familiar sharp scent of chlorine, mixed with the peculiar institutional smell of school athletics facilities. A combination of floor cleaner damp towels and the faint undertone of adolescent nervous energy. Ethan sat in the bleachers among other parents, feeling slightly out of place in this world of swim caps, stopwatches, and competitive coaching staff. He checked his watch 45 minutes until Maya's event, and then glanced at his phone, where a message from Agent Phillips glowed on the screen. "Secure transport arranged for 1300 hours. Rendezvous Portland Harbor, 1545, confirmation required." He sent a brief acknowledgement, then tucked the phone away, determined to be fully present for the next hour. This particular balancing act, being simultaneously a dedicated law enforcement officer and an attentive father, had never come easily to him, especially in the years following his divorce from Jennifer. "She's looking strong today," came a familiar voice as Jennifer Carson, formerly Blackwood, settled onto the bleacher beside him. At 41, she retained the athletic build of her college swimming days, her dark hair now styled in a practical bob, rather than the longer style she'd worn during their marriage. "Coach Martinez thinks she might break 2 minutes today. That would put her in qualifying position." Ethan noted, finding the conversational rhythm they had gradually developed over 7 years of co-parenting post-divorce. She was nervous this morning. Jennifer shared her gaze on the pool where swimmers for the first heat were assembling. Asked twice if you'd confirmed you were coming. Ethan felt the familiar pang of guilt that accompanied these conversations. Work almost pulled me away again. Major case broke yesterday. Jennifer nodded unsurprised. But you're here. That's what matters to her. After a moment, she added with the directness that had always characterized their relationship. You look tired, Ethan. The kind of tired that comes with a case that's getting under your skin. As that obvious to someone who was married to you for 9 years, yes. Despite the dissolution of their marriage, there remained a foundation of mutual respect between them. And occasionally, in moments like this, a glimpse of the understanding that had initially drawn them together. Maya mentioned you're working with that Belgian Malinois now. She said he's different from your previous partners. Hector, Ethan confirmed. And yes, he's unique, extraordinary instincts, but complicated, like he's carrying something from his past that makes him hold part of himself in reserve. Sounds familiar, Jennifer observed with a knowing look that Ethan chose not to acknowledge. Their conversation paused as the first race began and the swimmers launching from their blocks with practiced precision. Ethan found himself analyzing their form with the same attention to detail he applied to investigations, noting the efficiency of strokes, the timing of breaths, the subtle advantages gained or lost in the turns. There she is, Jennifer said suddenly, pointing toward the far end of the pool, where Maya had emerged from the locker room with her teammates. Even from a distance, Ethan could recognize his daughter immediately, the determined set of her shoulders, so reminiscent of her mother, the focused expression that coaches had been commenting on since she first joined the swim team at 10. Her dark hair was tucked beneath a competition cap bearing the school's eagle emblem, and she wore the team's blue racing suit, a towel draped around her shoulders, as she listened to last-minute instructions from her coach. As if sensing their attention, Maya glanced toward the bleachers, her serious expression breaking into a brief smile when she spotted her parents. She gave a small wave, which Ethan returned with an encouraging thumbs up. She looks ready, he said, feeling the peculiar mixture of pride and anxiety that seemed to characterize parenthood. The desire for your child to succeed, coupled with the protective instinct to shield them from disappointment. She's been ready for weeks, Jennifer confirmed. This is her moment. When Maya's event was finally called Girls 14 of 15 200-meter freestyle, Ethan found himself leaning forward, all thoughts of the Pacific Voyager and Operation Poseidon's Gate temporarily banished by the simple, powerful focus of watching his daughter take her place at the starting block. The swimmers took their positions, the tension in the pool area building as the starter raised his hand. The electronic tones sounded and 6 teenage bodies arced into the water almost simultaneously, creating a momentary explosion of white foam before settling into the rhythmic patterns of competition freestyle. Maya was in lane 4, her stroke rate slightly faster than her competitors, but with the efficient movement that her coaches had been refining all season. She reached the first turn in second position, executing a flawless flip that gained her a slight advantage as she began the second length. She's pacing herself, Jennifer murmured, her own competitive instincts engaged. Smart girl. By the halfway point, Maya had moved into the lead by half a body length, her turning pace steady and sustainable, where some of her competitors were beginning to show signs of fatigue. Ethan found himself on his feet without conscious decision, joining other parents in calling encouragement that probably couldn't be heard over the general noise of the competition. The third length showed Maya's strategy paying dividends as she maintained her lead, her stroke pattern remaining clean where others were beginning to lose form. As she made the final turn, her nearest competitor made a surge, closing the gap slightly. Come on, Maya. Ethan found himself saying, the intensity of his focus surprising even him. You've got this. The final 25 meters became a dual test of technique and will as Maya and the girl in lane 5 battled stroke for stroke. Maya's training showed in these crucial moments her breathing remained controlled. Her kick maintained its rhythm and her arms continued to pull with mechanical precision, despite the burning muscles that Ethan knew must be screaming for relief. When her hand finally touched the wall, the electronic scoreboard flashed the results almost instantly. Lane 4, Blackwood won 58-84. A personal best by nearly 3 seconds and good enough for first place by 0.4 of a second. The knot of teammates at the pool's edge erupted in cheers as Maya pulled herself from the water, breathing hard but breaking into a grin as her coach engulfed her in a congratulatory hug. The announcer's voice confirmed what the scoreboard already showed, that time qualifies Maya Blackwood for the state championships next month in Sacramento. Jennifer was already making her way down the bleachers, and Ethan followed, navigating through clusters of parents and siblings to reach the pool deck, where Maya was still receiving congratulations from teammates. When she saw her parents approaching, she broke away to meet them, her face flushed with exertion and triumph. "Shamani, Dad, Mom, did you see I broke 2 minutes?" The words tumbled out in excited bursts between deep breaths. "We saw, sweetheart." "You were amazing," Jennifer replied, pulling their daughter into a hug despite her wet swimsuit. "Your turns were perfect," Ethan added, professional assessment blending with paternal pride. "And your pacing was exactly right." Maya beamed at the specific praise, then surprised Ethan by throwing her arms around him in a fierce hug that left damp patches on his shirt. "You came," she said simply, the words carrying a weight of both gratitude and lingering uncertainty, the legacy of previous disappointments. "Wouldn't have missed it," he replied, returning the embrace and momentarily resting his chin on her swim cap. "I told you I'd be here." The moment was interrupted by Maya's coach calling the team together for a post-meet discussion. With a final quick hug for both parents, she rejoined her teammates, already shifting back into the focused athlete they had watched in the water. "She gets that compartmentalization from you," Jennifer observed as they walked back toward the bleachers to collect their things. "The ability to fully immerse in whatever she's doing at the moment." "Is that a compliment or a criticism?" Ethan asked, though without defensiveness. "Just an observation," Jennifer replied, "though it served her well in athletics." She paused, then added with characteristic directness, "You're leaving again, aren't you? I can see it in how you keep checking the time." Ethan nodded, not bothering to deny it. "Operation connected to yesterday's case. I delayed joining as long as possible to be here for her." "And she'll appreciate that," Jennifer acknowledged. "Just make sure you're back for the state championships. Those matter even more." "I'll be there," Ethan promised, already calculating the likely timeline of the Poseidon's Gate operation against the competition schedule. "Nothing will keep me away from that." Jennifer's slight smile suggested she'd heard similar promises before, but she merely nodded. "I'll make sure she has everything she needs for the next few days. Will you be able to call?" "Should be, though potentially at odd hours. I'll be on an undercover operation." "Be careful, Ethan." She said, the simple words carrying the weight of their shared history and the understanding that despite their separation, Maya needed both her parents whole and present in her life. After a final round of congratulations and a promise to call that evening, Ethan left the aquatic center, the chlorine scent still clinging to his clothes as he walked to his car, where Agent Phillips would meet him in 20 minutes. The transition felt jarring from the bright celebratory atmosphere of the swim meet to the shadowy world of international criminal networks and covert operations. His phone buzzed with a message from Sophia, ship departure on schedule, crew replacements, complete. How did Maya do? He smiled as he typed his reply. First place state qualifier, 1:58.84. Her response came almost immediately. That's incredible. Tell her Aunt Sophia says congratulations and ice cream is on me when you get back. The use of Aunt Sophia made Ethan smile. Though not related by blood, Sophia had become something of a surrogate aunt to Maya, over the years attending school events when Ethan couldn't make it, and offering the kind of female mentorship that complemented Jennifer's more structured parenting approach. A black SUV with government plates pulled smoothly into the parking space beside Ethan's vehicle, and Agent Phillips emerged, the same square-jawed man from the morning briefing, now dressed in nondescript clothing that would allow him to blend into any casual environment. Detective Blackwood? He greeted Ethan with a firm handshake. Everything set for transport to Portland. Just need to collect my partner and equipment. Ethan confirmed we can be ready within the hour. Good to him. Phillips nodded. The Pacific Voyager is currently underway, proceeding as scheduled toward Portland. Agent Rivera is coordinating from our mobile command center. She asked me to brief you on developments during transit. Keatorn, shouting. As they drove to Ethan's home to collect Hector and his equipment, Phillips provided a detailed update on Operation Poseidon's Gate. The undercover team had successfully integrated with the remaining legitimate crew members, maintaining the vessel's normal operations while conducting covert surveillance. Technical teams had discovered additional concealed communications equipment, and preliminary analysis of the seized electronics was yielding valuable intelligence on the network structure. The most significant development, Phillips explained as they neared Ethan's neighborhood, came from Captain Ramirez himself. After initial resistance, he's begun cooperating in exchange for consideration in his eventual prosecution. What changed his mind? Ethan asked, surprised by this development. The captain had seemed too disciplined to break easily. Apparently, your discovery of the hidden compartment in his quarters contained something even he wasn't fully aware of. Phillips replied, the technical analysis revealed that some of the equipment was not just gathering intelligence, but actively transmitting data about him, monitoring his communications, tracking his movements on and off the vessel. He was being watched by his own employers. They didn't trust him, Ethan surmised. They don't trust anyone, Phillips corrected. According to Ramirez, the network operates on a principle of total information awareness. Everyone is monitored, everyone is expendable. The revelations about how extensively he was being surveilled apparently caused something of an existential crisis. They pulled into Ethan's driveway, a modest single-story house in a quiet neighborhood where most residents were blissfully unaware that one of their neighbors regularly confronted some of the most dangerous elements on the West Coast. The yard was small but well-maintained, with the practical landscaping of someone who appreciated order but lacked time for elaborate gardening. I'll just be a few minutes, Ethan told Phillips as they exited the vehicle. As they approached the front door, a series of sharp barks announced that Hector was already aware of their arrival. Mrs. Padilla, the retired schoolteacher from next door, who looked after Hector during Ethan's occasional daytime absences, opened the door before he could insert his key. He's been restless all morning, she informed Ethan with the slightly disapproving tone she reserved for what she considered his excessive work schedule. Pacing by the windows, checking the door every few minutes, like he knew you were coming back earlier than usual. He probably did, Ethan acknowledged, stepping inside to be greeted by an uncharacteristically demonstrative Hector, who pressed against his legs in a rare display of physical affection. He has an internal clock that's better than any watch I've owned. Will you be gone long this time? Mrs. Padilla inquired, her gaze taking in Agent Phillips with the shrewd assessment of someone who had spent decades evaluating people's characters. A few days, probably, Ethan replied, moving toward the spare bedroom that served as his home office and equipment storage. I appreciate you looking after him this morning. He's good company, the elderly woman acknowledged with a fond glance at Hector, who had already shifted into working mode, following Ethan attentively. Though he never fully relaxes when you're away, always on alert that one, Deborah, Ethan efficiently gathered his equipment, specialized tactical gear, additional K9 supplies for Hector communication devices, and the various tools of his trade. Within 15 minutes, they were back in the SUV, heading toward the small airfield where a government transport would take them to Portland. As they drove, Ethan found his thoughts alternating between the case ahead and the moment he just left behind, Maya's triumphant smile, the perfect execution of her swimming technique, the simple joy of being present for a milestone in his daughter's life. The dichotomy of his existence had never felt more pronounced. Loving father and dedicated officer, each role essential, yet sometimes seemingly incompatible. Hector, sensing his handler's contemplative mood, rested his muzzle briefly on Ethan's shoulder from the specially designed compartment behind the rear seats, a gesture of solidarity that spoke to their deepening connection. In that moment, Ethan felt a surge of gratitude for his extraordinary partner, who somehow managed to bridge the gap between his separate worlds as comfortable, providing security during the occasional weekend when Maya stayed at his house as he was tracking dangerous criminals through the labyrinthine spaces of cargo vessels. We're heading into something complicated, aren't we, boy? Ethan murmured, reaching back to scratch beneath Hector's collar. The dog's amber eyes met his with that peculiar depth of understanding that sometimes made Ethan wonder exactly how much Hector comprehended of the human world around him. Not just the commands and routines, but the underlying currents of emotion and intention that drove human behavior. I think you're right. Ethan continued quietly as though they were having a genuine conversation. This goes deeper than we've seen before. Phillips glanced over with an expression of amused respect. You two have that telepathy thing going already. Took me and my service dog in Afghanistan almost 2 years to get to that point. Hector's special, Ethan replied simply. Sometimes I think he understands things before I do. The best partners usually do. Phillips agreed, his tone suggesting he was speaking from experience. The Portland Harbor Operation Command Center had been established in a nondescript warehouse near Terminal 6, its exterior, giving no indication of the sophisticated technical equipment and personnel within. When Ethan arrived with Hector at his side, the operation was already in full swing. Intelligence analysts monitoring communications, technical specialists processing data from the ship's surveillance equipment, and field coordinators mapping deployment positions for the interdiction teams. Agent Rivera looked up from a central planning table as they entered, her expression revealing a momentary flicker of approval at their prompt arrival. Detective Blackwood, welcome to the party. Your timing is excellent. The Pacific Voyager will dock in approximately 2 hours. What's our current intelligence? Ethan asked, accepting the tablet she handed him with the latest operational briefing. The ship has maintained normal operations during transit. Rivera explained, leading him to a digital display showing the vessel's approach to Portland. Our undercover team reports no suspicious communications or activities from the legitimate crew. The replacements for the detained smugglers have successfully integrated and maintained cover. Any indication that the network suspects the interdiction in San Francisco discovered more than just the narcotics? Ethan asked, scanning the detailed briefing materials. None so far, Rivera confirmed. The official story released to the media was a routine drug seizure with several arrests, but no indications of a larger operation. As far as the network should be concerned, their more sophisticated operations remain undetected. And the Portland contact, Sophia, joined them, having been monitoring communications from a nearby workstation. She looked refreshed and focused, clearly having settled easily into the operation's rhythm. We've identified a likely candidate, Rivera replied, bringing up surveillance photographs on the main display. Marcus Chen, officially a logistics consultant for Pacific Rim Import-Export. His company handles specialized cargo transfers for high-value technology components. He's scheduled to meet the ship upon arrival to coordinate the offloading of 3 specific containers. The same containers referenced in the captain's hidden logs, Ethan noted, recognizing the designations from their initial discovery in San Francisco. Exactly, Rivera nodded. Based on Ramirez's cooperation, we believe those containers hold legitimate technology components, but with modified sections containing industrial espionage, materials specifically prototype semiconductor manufacturing equipment that's subject to export restrictions. The discussion continued into the technical details of the planned operation, how the undercover team would maintain their cover while facilitating the intelligence gathering, the positioning of surveillance teams throughout the port, and the protocol for potential intervention if the situation warranted. Your role will be particularly important in Seattle, Rivera informed Ethan and Sophia. Based on the intelligence we've gathered, that's where the most significant technology transfer is scheduled to occur. Portland appears to be a smaller operation, possibly even a test run before the main event. As the briefing concluded and teams dispersed to their assigned positions, Sophia pulled Ethan aside, her expression questioning. How did it go with Maya? You look like a man trying to be in 2 places at once. She qualified for state championships. Ethan replied, unable to keep the pride from his voice. Swam the race exactly as she'd trained for it. That's fantastic, Sophia said with genuine enthusiasm. And how are you feeling about being here instead of celebrating with her? Ethan considered the question, carefully aware that his partner knew him well enough to detect any evasion. Divided, he admitted finally. Professionally, I know this operation is crucial, Personally, he shrugged, leaving the sentence unfinished. The eternal balancing act. Sophia nodded in understanding. For what it's worth, I think you made the right call. You were there for her milestone, and now you're here where your skills are needed. That's about as good as it gets in our line of work. Before Ethan could respond, Hector suddenly stiffened beside him, his attention fixed on something across the command center. Following his partner's gaze, Ethan spotted a man he didn't recognize entering through a side door, someone whose body language immediately struck him as misaligned with the operational environment. The newcomer wore the identification badge of a technical support contractor, but his movements had the measured precision of someone with tactical training rather than the more casual demeanor typical of IT specialists. More tellingly, his eyes performed a rapid assessment of the room that reminded Ethan of his own habits when entering unfamiliar territory, identifying exits, noting personnel positions, cataloging potential threats. Sophia, Ethan said quietly. 3 o'clock, technical contractor in the gray shirt. Does something seem off to you? Sophia glanced casually in the indicated direction, her expression remaining neutral, even as her eyes narrowed slightly. Definitely, that's not the body language of someone who spends his days behind a computer. Hector's continued focus confirmed Ethan's suspicions. The Malinois had developed an uncanny ability to identify individuals whose presented personas didn't match their actual intentions, a skill that had proven invaluable in numerous operations. Keep an eye on him, Ethan murmured, subtly positioning himself to maintain visual contact with the suspicious contractor while appearing to review the operation materials. I'm going to check with security about the technical support rotation. He had taken only 3 steps toward the security coordinator's station when the situation escalated with stunning rapidity. The contractor abruptly abandoned all pretense of belonging, drawing a concealed weapon from beneath his shirt and firing twice into the ceiling. The shots creating an immediate moment of shocked silence before the room erupted into action. "Nobody move!" The man shouted, his accent now distinctly Eastern European, as he swung his weapon toward the command center's main server bank. "Hands where I can see them, or I start shooting people instead of equipment." The security personnel present had already drawn their weapons, creating a tense standoff across the operations floor. Civilians dropped to the ground or sought cover behind workstations while trained agents assessed angles and risks with the cold calculation of their profession. Ethan had instinctively moved to a position of tactical advantage, drawing his sidearm while simultaneously giving Hector the silent hand signal. To hold position, the dog freezing in place, muscles tensed and ready, but making no movement that might provoke the gunman. You are surrounded and outgunned." Rivera's voice cut through the chaos, her tone carrying the authority of someone accustomed to high-pressure situations. "Drop your weapon immediately." The intruder's response was a harsh laugh, utterly devoid of humor. "You think I came here expecting to leave? I came to complete my mission." He shifted position, maintaining his aim at the server bank, which is to ensure that none of the data you've gathered leaves this facility. The man's intention became immediately clear. He was a containment measure sent to destroy the intelligence operation, not by surviving, but by ensuring its failure through the destruction of critical infrastructure and data. It was the desperate move of a network that had begun to suspect its security was compromised. "That's not going to happen," Ethan said calmly, moving slightly to draw the man's attention away from the servers and the analysts who had taken cover nearby. "Your network sent you on a suicide mission, but there's still a way out of this where you survive, sure." The gunman's eyes flicked toward Ethan, narrowing as they registered both his tactical stance and the calm assessment in his expression. "You know nothing about my network or my mission?" He spat, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "I know they consider you expendable." Ethan countered, maintaining steady eye contact while calculating distances and angles. "Just like they considered Captain Ramirez expendable and the crew members on the Pacific Voyager. None of you are essential to their operation, just tools to be discarded when no longer useful." The mention of Ramirez caused a momentary break in the man's focus, a tell that confirmed Ethan's suspicion that the intruder was connected to the Poseidon's Gate operation Rather than being a random security breach, Ramirez is a coward who broke under pressure. The man snarled his weapon, wavering slightly as his attention divided between Ethan and the server bank. "I am not so weak." "Ramirez is alive and negotiating terms," Ethan replied, taking a calculated risk with the partial truth. "Which is more than your handlers expect of you. They sent you here to die, not to succeed." The psychological pressure appeared to be working, creating just enough doubt to fracture the man's resolve. Ethan could see the micro-expressions crossing his face, the momentary calculations behind his eyes as he reassessed his situation. In that crucial moment of hesitation, Ethan gave the command he and Hector had practiced countless times in situations precisely like this. "Hector, disarm." The Belgian Malinois launched from his position, with explosive speed covering the 15 feet to the gunman in a blur of coordinated muscle and focused intention. Trained to target the arm holding the weapon, Hector's jaws clamped around the man's wrist with precisely calibrated pressure, enough to force him to drop the gun, but not enough to cause permanent damage. The impact of 75 pounds of highly trained dog hitting his arm caused the intruder to stagger backward, the weapon clattering to the floor as his focus shattered completely under the shock of the attack. Before he could recover, Ethan had closed the distance, executing a perfect takedown that pinned the man face down on the floor. "A release," Ethan commanded, and Hector immediately let go of the man's wrist, stepping back to a guard position as security personnel swarmed around them, securing the intruder with professional efficiency. "Clear," Chi called the security coordinator, and the command center gradually returned to operational status, though with a heightened alertness that permeated every interaction. "That's twice in 2 days. Your partner has made a critical difference," Rivera observed, approaching once the situation was fully contained. "Impressive animal." "He's the best there is," Ethan agreed, rewarding Hector with a brief scratch behind the ears, the subtle acknowledgement that meant more to the dog than effusive praise would have. The intruder was quickly identified as Alexei Volkov, a former Special Forces operator from an Eastern European country now working as a freelance security contractor, exactly the kind of highly trained professional that a sophisticated criminal network would deploy for a critical containment operation. "This confirms our suspicions," Rivera noted as they regrouped at the command table. "The network has realized something is wrong. They may not know exactly what we've discovered, but they're implementing countermeasures, which means the Seattle operation will likely be canceled or significantly modified." Sophia surmised they won't risk another exposure point if they suspect surveillance. "Perhaps," Rivera agreed. "But networks like this have invested too much in their infrastructure to abandon operations entirely. More likely, they'll attempt to salvage what they can while implementing security protocols to identify the breach." The discussion was interrupted by an analyst who approached with an urgent update. "Agent Rivera, we've just intercepted communications from the Pacific Voyager. The vessel is requesting an unexpected course change, citing mechanical issues that require immediate attention at a secondary port facility. They're diverting," Rivera realized immediately, "attempting to break contact with our surveillance." The operations center shifted into high alert as the implications became clear. The network had likely instructed the remaining operatives aboard the vessel to abort the scheduled deliveries and implement contingency plans. The undercover team embedded with the crew would be at significant risk if the deception was discovered. "Where are they attempting to divert to?" Ethan asked, studying the navigational display that showed the Pacific Voyager using current position, still approaching Portland's main shipping channel. "Rocky Point Harbor." The analyst replied, "It's a smaller industrial port about 30 miles downriver, primarily serves the timber industry, but has limited container facilities. Perfect for an unscheduled transfer with minimal official oversight." Sophia noted, "They're planning to offload their sensitive cargo before it can be examined in Portland." Rivera made an immediate decision. "We need to maintain the illusion that we're unaware of their true intentions. Authorize the course change, but deploy surveillance teams to Rocky Point immediately. If they're planning a transfer, we need eyes on the receiving party." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of coordinated activity as the operation rapidly adjusted to the changing situation. Surveillance teams were redirected, Marine intercept units positioned, and the undercover operatives aboard the Pacific Voyager carefully briefed on the new parameters. Ethan found himself assigned to the advanced team, deploying to Rocky Point Harbor with Hector's tracking abilities considered essential for identifying the transfer point in the sprawling industrial port. As they prepared for deployment, Rivera pulled him aside for a final briefing. "This situation has escalated beyond our initial expectations." She acknowledged her usual composure, showing slight cracks under the pressure of the rapidly evolving operation. "The network is clearly implementing burn protocols, attempting to salvage key assets while abandoning compromised infrastructure, which makes them even more dangerous." Ethan noted, "Nothing makes a criminal organization more unpredictable than feeling cornered." "Exactly," Rivera agreed. "We believe they'll attempt to transfer the high-value technology from containers to ground transport at Rocky Point, then disappear into secondary distribution networks before we can intercept." "What about the undercover team on the ship, Arno?" "They've been instructed to maintain cover but prioritize their safety. If the situation degenerates, they'll identify themselves as federal agents and take control of the vessel." She hesitated, then added, "But that's a last resort. Our primary objective remains tracking the technology to its intended recipients." As they loaded into helicopters for the short flight to Rocky Point, Ethan found himself alongside Sophia and a tactical team from Homeland Security specialists in maritime interdiction operations. Hector settled calmly at his feet, seemingly untroubled by the helicopter's vibrations and noise. His attention focused on his handler's face as though awaiting further instructions. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," Sophia commented during a lull in the pre-mission briefing, "about feeling divided between your professional and personal obligations." Ethan raised an eyebrow, surprised by the timing of the conversation. "Not sure this is the moment for philosophical discussions about work-life balance." "Actually, I think it's exactly the right moment," she countered, "because what we're about to do matters not just professionally but personally. The technology these people are trafficking strengthens hostile governments and terrorist organizations. The narcotics destroy families and communities." She glanced toward the tactical team members checking their equipment at the far end of the helicopter. "So when Maya asks why you had to leave right after her swim meet, you can tell her it was to make sure she grows up in a world where fewer families have to deal with the consequences of these organizations." Ethan considered this perspective, finding unexpected comfort in the reframing of his perpetual conflict. Before he could respond, the pilot announced they were approaching the landing zone, and the conversation necessarily shifted to operational details. Rocky Point Harbor appeared through the helicopter's windows, a sprawling industrial port facility nestled against the Columbia River's edge. Its weathered buildings and towering lumber stacks creating a maze of potential concealment. Several vessels were docked along its piers, but the Pacific Voyager was not yet visible, still making its way upriver toward the unexpected detour. As they touched down in a clearing near the port's administrative buildings, Ethan felt the familiar surge of focused awareness that accompanied deployment into potentially hostile territory. Years of training and experience coalesced into a heightened state where each sense seemed sharper, each detail more significant. Hector sensed the shift in his handler's demeanor, his own body language changing to match alert, but controlled, ready for whatever challenges awaited them as they stepped once more into the shadowy intersection of international shipping, criminal enterprise, and the dedicated few who stood against them. The operation that unfolded over the next 4 hours would later be described in classified briefings as a textbook example of adaptive interdiction, a fluid, responsive effort that shifted with each new development in the rapidly evolving situation. For those directly involved, however, it was simply a series of critical moments where training instinct and partnership were tested against determined opposition. The Pacific Voyager docked at Rocky Point's commercial pier at 4:17 p.m., its massive hull dwarfing the smaller vessels typically serviced at the facility. Surveillance teams positioned throughout the port reported minimal standard crew activity on deck, a skeleton complement, performing routine docking procedures while the majority remained below. More tellingly, 3 unmarked trucks had arrived at the port 30 minutes before the ship, positioning themselves near the designated offloading area. The drivers remained in their vehicles, maintaining radio silence and exhibiting the situational awareness characteristic of trained operatives, rather than regular commercial drivers. Ethan and Sophia established their observation post in an abandoned lumber storage shed with clear sight lines to both the vessel and the waiting trucks. Hector lay beside them, utterly still, except for his nose working continuously to catalog the scents carried on the river breeze. "They're waiting for something," Sophia murmured, observing the scene through high-powered binoculars. "The cranes aren't being prepared. No dock workers have approached the vessel. Night operations," Ethan surmised. "They're waiting for darkness before attempting the transfer." This assessment proved accurate as twilight descended over the port, bringing with it a subtle but significant change in activity aboard the Pacific Voyager. Lights that would normally illuminate a vessel during night operations remained dark, and figures could be seen moving purposefully near the container section identified in Captain Ramirez's hidden logs. "They're preparing to move," Ethan reported via secure comlink to the Operation Command Team. "Minimal illumination, focused activity near target containers." Rivera's voice responded immediately. "All teams maintain positions. Let them begin the transfer before we move in. We need to identify all participants and confirm the cargo." The waiting was always the hardest part. The prolonged tension of anticipating action while remaining perfectly still and vigilant. Ethan used the time to mentally review the port layout, identifying potential escape routes and choke points where interdiction would be most effective. Beside him, Hector's ears suddenly pricked forward, his attention shifting toward a section of the dock not directly visible from their position. The dog's behavior had become a trusted early warning system, often detecting approach or movement before human observers. "Something's happening on the far side," Ethan whispered, trusting his partner's senses. Hector's picked up activity. Sophia adjusted her position slightly, using a mirror attachment on her binoculars to view around the corner of their concealment. "Two more vehicles arriving," she confirmed. "SUVs with tinted windows, commercial plates, but the driving pattern suggests security training." The new arrivals parked behind the waiting trucks, and 4 men emerged from each vehicle. Their movements disciplined and coordinated, their attire civilian, but with the unmistakable bearing of professional security personnel. More concerning was the subtle bulge beneath their jackets, indicating concealed weapons. "Armed security detail has joined the operation," Ethan reported. 8 additional hostiles, likely carrying automatic weapons based on their equipment profile. "Acknowledged," Rivera responded. "Tactical teams are standing by, maintain a surveillance, but do not engage unless the situation becomes critical." The first container began moving from the ship to the dock at precisely 8:42 p.m. The operation conducted with minimal lighting and maximum efficiency. Unlike standard port operations with their accompanying noise and illumination, this transfer moved with the deliberate stealth of a team accustomed to working unobserved. Container PCE 421 is being offloaded, Sophia reported, documenting the process with a specialized camera designed for low-light conditions. 4 handlers on the dock, 2 supervisors directing placement. The container was carefully lowered onto the waiting flatbed of the first truck, its security seals immediately inspected by one of the supervisors. After confirmation, a subtle hand signal sent 2 of the security personnel to establish defensive positions at the dock's entrance. Clearly anticipating potential intervention, they're setting up a perimeter. Ethan observed, "These aren't amateur smugglers. This is a professional extraction operation." As the second container began its descent from the vessel, Hector suddenly tensed his attention, shifting from the dock activity to something beyond their immediate field of view. A low growl, barely audible, rumbled in his chest, a warning Ethan had learned never to ignore. "We've got company," he whispered to Sophia, already shifting to a defensive position. "Hector's alerting to approach from our 6. Sophia immediately adjusted her posture, drawing her weapon while maintaining visual coverage of the ongoing transfer. "How many?" Before Ethan could respond, Hector's growl deepened slightly, his signal for multiple threats rather than a single approach. Seconds later, Ethan's trained ear caught what his partner had already detected, the subtle crunch of footsteps on gravel approaching from behind their position with the measured pace of trained operators attempting stealth, at least two moving tactically. Ethan murmured, making a quick decision. They've somehow identified our position. We need to relocate before they can compromise the operation. The seconds that followed demonstrated why Ethan and Sophia had become one of the Harbor Police's most effective teams. Without verbal communication, they executed a synchronized withdrawal gathering, essential equipment, while Hector maintained his alert posture, tracking the approaching threat with invisible precision. They had barely cleared the rear exit of the lumber shed when the first flashlight beam swept through the space they had occupied moments before. Rather than fleeing, they circled to a flanking position using the shadowed perimeter of the building to gain tactical advantage on their pursuers. Harbor Police, Ethan announced firmly as the two security operatives emerged from the building, clearly confused by the absence of their targets. Drop your weapons and place your hands above your heads. The response was immediate and violent, both men pivoting toward the sound. With weapons already drawn, Ethan had anticipated this reaction, and his command came in the split second before they could fire. Hector Take, the Belgian Malinois, launched from his position beside Ethan, a controlled missile of muscle and training that struck the nearest gunman with precision, targeting the arm holding the weapon. The impact and surprise caused an involuntary discharge as the man felt the bullet harmlessly embedding itself in the wooden wall of the shed. Simultaneously, Sophia engaged the second operative, her timing perfect as she executed a tactical takedown that neutralized the threat before he could bring his weapon to bear on either Ethan or Hector. Dispatch, we have two hostile operators in custody. Ethan reported into his comm unit as they secured the subdued men with zip tie restraints. Our position has been compromised and the main operation appears to be aware of law enforcement presence. Rivera's response was immediate and decisive. All teams execute primary interdiction plan. Now secure the containers and detain all personnel involved in the transfer. The port erupted into coordinated action as tactical teams emerged from concealed positions, converging on the dock where the container transfer had been interrupted mid-operation by the gunshot. The security team protecting the transfer immediately took defensive positions, creating a tense standoff, illuminated by suddenly activated floodlights. Federal agents boomed an amplified voice across the dock. Drop your weapons and surrender immediately. For a moment, it seemed the security team might comply, several of them looking to their leader for direction. Then in a sudden escalation, the supervisor gave a sharp hand signal, and the dock exploded into chaos as both sides opened fire. Ethan and Sophia had been moving toward the confrontation when the shooting began, immediately taking cover behind a stack of lumber as bullets splintered wood around them. Hector remained pressed against Ethan's side, his training keeping him in position despite the natural canine instinct to flee from gunfire. They're making a push for the trucks, Sophia observed, risking a quick glance around their cover. Trying to extract with the first container, through the sporadic illumination of muzzle flashes and emergency lights, Ethan could see federal agents establishing a blocking position while the security team executed a fighting retreat toward the vehicles. The first truck's engine had roared to life, beginning to move despite the ongoing firefight. They can't be allowed to leave with that container, Ethan said, assessing their options. The laptop and equipment Ramirez had transferred to the authorities, the containers that held more. Rivera said it contains restricted technology that could compromise national security if it reaches its destination. We can engage directly, Sophia countered, gesturing to the intensity of the firefight between the federal agents and the security team. That's a tactical situation beyond our capability. Ethan studied the layout of the dock area, identifying a potential alternate approach. We don't need to engage the security team, we need to stop that truck. He pointed to a secondary access road that curved around the edge of the dock. If we can circle behind using that maintenance path, we might be able to intercept before it reaches the main road. Sophia nodded immediately, understanding his intention. We'll need transportation. Ethan indicated a Port Authority vehicle parked near the administrative building. Let's move. They reached the vehicle without incident, Finding the keys conveniently stored above the visor, a common practice in secure port facilities where quick access to transportation might be necessary. As Sophia took the wheel, Ethan secured Hector in the rear compartment, then checked the tactical situation through his binoculars. The truck is breaking through the federal perimeter, he reported as Sophia accelerated onto the maintenance road. Heading for the north exit. We've got maybe 2 minutes to get into position. The Port Authority vehicle bounced over the rough service road, its suspension protesting as Sophia pushed it to its limits. They emerged onto the main exit road, just as the flatbed truck appeared at the far end, accelerating toward what its driver clearly believed was escape. Block the road, Ethan instructed, already formulating their intercept strategy. Force them to either stop or go off-road. Sophia positioned the vehicle diagonally across the narrow exit, creating an improvised roadblock that left the truck driver with limited options. As the flatbed approached its headlights illuminating their position, Ethan deployed spike strips from the Port Authority vehicle's emergency kit, a standard tool for harbor security operations. They're not slowing down. Sophia observed, her voice tight with tension as the truck continued its approach at high speed. I think they're going to ram us. Out of the vehicle, Ethan ordered, already moving to release Hector from the rear compartment. Position for containment if they breach the roadblock. They barely cleared the Port Authority vehicle when the truck driver made his decision, veering sharply to the right in an attempt to bypass the roadblock by driving on the narrow shoulder. The maneuver might have succeeded with a smaller vehicle, but the flatbed's width and the container's weight made it impossible to maintain control at such speed on the uneven surface. The truck tilted precariously as its right wheels left the pavement, the container's momentum shifting dangerously. For a suspended moment, it seemed the driver might recover control. Then physics took over as the massive container shifted, pulling the entire vehicle onto its side in a cacophony of tearing metal and breaking glass. The truck skidded to a stop 20 yards beyond their position, the container still attached but visibly damaged from the impact. Smoke poured from the crushed engine compartment, and fluids leaked onto the pavement in expanding pools illuminated by the vehicle's one remaining headlight. Check the driver, Ethan directed Sophia as he approached the container with Hector at his side. I'll secure the cargo. The container had buckled along one seam, its doors partially dislodged by the impact. Through the opening, Ethan could see what appeared to be industrial equipment, large metal components secured in specialized packaging. Nothing immediately identifiable as restricted technology, but consistent with the sophisticated concealment methods they had discovered aboard the Pacific Voyager. Drivers alive but injured. Sophia reported returning from the cab. Looks like he was wearing body armor, probably saved him from more serious injuries in the rollover. Federal teams are converging on our position, Ethan noted, hearing the approaching sirens and seeing the flashlight beams moving toward them from the direction of the dock. We need to secure this scene until they arrive. The aftermath unfolded with the organized chaos that typically followed major operations medical teams, treating the injured, evidence technicians documenting the scene, and federal agents debriefing those involved in various aspects of the interdiction. Ethan and Sophia found themselves in the Port Authority's administrative building, providing detailed statements about their involvement in stopping the fleeing truck. The technical teams have confirmed your suspicions, Rivera informed them when she finally joined them, the strain of the operation evident in the tightness around her eyes. Despite her composed demeanor, the container held specialized semiconductor manufacturing equipment disguised as standard industrial components, exactly the kind of restricted technology we were concerned about. What about the ship and the other containers? Sophia asked. Secured, Rivera confirmed. The undercover team maintained their cover until the operation went kinetic, then assisted in taking control of the vessel. We've detained the remaining crew for questioning, though initial assessments suggest most were legitimate mariners unaware of the smuggling operation. And the network, Ethan inquired absent-mindedly, scratching behind Hector's ears as the dog rested its head on his knee, a rare display of fatigue from the normally tireless animal. That's where your contribution becomes particularly significant, Rivera said, producing a tablet that displayed images from the container Ethan and Sophia had prevented from escaping. The technical components were packaged with documentation that our analysts believe will help map the network's distribution system. The emergency extraction attempt actually gave us more intelligence than we might have gathered from a controlled delivery squirrel. Sometimes panic reveals more than planning, Sophia observed. Exactly, Rivera agreed. The network's contingency protocols expose connections and methods we might never have identified otherwise. She paused, studying them both with frank assessment. Your decision to pursue the truck independently while federal assets were engaged with the security team showed exceptional initiative. Homeland Security has specifically requested that I convey their appreciation. Coming from Rivera, this was high praise indeed. Ethan nodded acknowledgement, too exhausted to fully process the significance of the commendation. The adrenaline that had carried him through the operation was fading, leaving the bone-deep weariness that followed intense physical and mental exertion. What happens now, he asked, already calculating how soon they might be able to return to San Francisco. The federal investigation continues. Rivera replied, Operation Poseidon's Gate has been significantly disrupted, but networks like this have depth and redundancy. There will be other vessels, other routes, other methods. She paused, then added with a rare smile, but tonight at least, we've dealt them a serious setback. That's worth something. As the debriefing concluded and arrangements were made for their return to San Francisco, Ethan found a quiet moment to call Maya. Despite the late hour, she answered immediately, her voice still carrying the excitement of her earlier triumph. Dad, I was hoping you'd call. Coach posted the official results, and my time qualifies me for the first heat at state. Only 6 swimmers in my age group broke 2 minutes in the entire region. That's incredible, sweetheart, Ethan replied, feeling the strange disconnect between the violent confrontation he had just experienced and the innocent excitement of his daughter's athletic achievement. I'm so proud of you. Are you still working on that big case? She asked, her tone suggesting she had already accepted the reality of his absence. Mom said you had to leave right after the meet. Yes, but we made significant progress today. He told her, carefully filtering the details into an appropriate version for 14-year-old ears. I should be home soon. Did you take Hector with you? Is he there now? He's right here, Ethan confirmed, smiling at her evident affection for his partner. He did amazing work today, probably saved lives. Tell him I said he's the best dog ever, and I'm saving him some of my victory ice cream. Maya instructed with the seriousness children reserve for promises involving beloved animals. I will, Ethan assured her, his chest tightening with an emotion that had nothing to do with the day's exertions and everything to do with the remarkable young person his daughter was becoming. Get some sleep now. I'll try to be back for your practice on Thursday, me. After ending the call, Ethan found Sophia waiting nearby, respectfully having given him privacy for the conversation, but now ready to coordinate their return transportation. How's our future Olympic champion? She inquired with genuine interest. Excited about qualifying for state, Ethan replied, gathering his equipment as Hector rose to his feet, instantly alert despite his earlier fatigue. She's saving some ice cream for Hector. Smart girl, Sophia nodded approvingly. She knows who really runs your partnership. As they made their way to the waiting transport that would take them to the airfield, Ethan found himself reflecting on the peculiar duality of his existence. The seamless transitions he had to make between worlds that seemed impossibly distant from each other, from a high school swim meet to an armed confrontation with international smugglers in the span of a single day. From proud father to tactical operator and back again, each role demanding its own particular form of presence and commitment. Beside him, Hector patted quietly, the dog's unwavering focus, a reminder of the simpler, more direct relationship with duty that animals maintain. No divided loyalties or competing obligations, just the clear purpose of the immediate task and the bond with his handler. You know what I realized today? Ethan said to Sophia as they climbed aboard the transport vehicle. We talk about work-life balance like they're separate things, but they're not. Not really. The reason I care about stopping organizations like Poseidon's Gate is precisely because I want Maya to grow up in a world where people are protected from them. Sophia considered this for a moment before nodding. The personal is professional and vice versa. That's why we do this job, not despite having people we care about, but because of them. As the vehicle pulled away from Rocky Point Harbor, its headlights illuminating the road ahead, Ethan felt Hector settle against his leg, a warm, solid presence that somehow bridged the gap between his separate worlds. The Belgian Malinois had demonstrated once again the extraordinary intuition and courage that made him not just a working partner, but a connection to something deeper. A reminder of the simple, profound truth that sometimes the greatest insights come from those who observe the world not through human complexity, but through the direct, unfiltered perception of a different kind of intelligence. "We did good work today, didn't we?" "Boy," Ethan murmured, receiving in answer a gentle pressure as Hector leaned more firmly against him, the canine equivalent of complete agreement. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new balancing acts between professional duty and personal connection. But for tonight at least, Ethan could take satisfaction in having served both worlds well, being present for his daughter's triumph and helping to protect countless other families from the shadow organizations that threaten from the margins of everyday awareness. As the lights of Portland appeared in the distance, Ethan allowed himself to close his eyes, briefly secure in the knowledge that beside him, Hector remained vigilant, the sentinel whose extraordinary perceptions had once again illuminated the path through darkness, both literal and figurative, guiding them safely through the harbor shadows toward home.